Hi, everybody. April already. Welcome to Next Step Leadership's LeaderCast. We are really excited to steal some time with Dr. Daniel Peppe today. I can't begin to tell you how excited I am. We have some cool questions for him. When I first was approached about this opportunity, it was more of a moment of geosciences. Where are we going to go with that? But let me give you a little background. I've known Dan Peppe since early 1999. Don't let anybody know. Okay, we're old. We were actually thinking about how old we are, but Dan has one of the biggest hearts that you will ever find in this world, and this is for me. This is an opportunity to celebrate him and the body of work that he has in this world, and also, if you want, you can see him up close and personal in lesson 51 of Lessons in Leadership, Volume 2. Dan talks about the many hats of academia and what that looks like from simultaneous innovation. In his piece, he actually talks about what it's like to get a job and go, oh, I have no idea. I have no training in what that looks like. But I'm also in charge of this. I'm on this committee. I'm doing these things. And it sounds a lot like many of us. We get into a job and we're just told to go forth, or they tell you, oh, you're the new Wilbur. So you must also do this, right? Because you're the new Wilbur, and you don't know who Wilbur was or what Wilbur actually did, but that's your title now of what Wilbur used to be. And Dan does a magnificent job of describing what it's like to take on a role of leadership, and also the blessing it can be to take on a role and also have the capability to be involved with so many other pieces. So welcome, Dr. Daniel Peppe.
Thanks, Ed.
Professor in the Department of Geosciences at Baylor University, coming to us today. I am so excited to have you. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I was excited to be invited to join the podcast.
Oh, cool. Man, it's great to have you. So we have questions from our followers, and then I have some next step questions. Are you ready to rock?
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do this.
All right. Who is Dr. Daniel Peppe?
Oh, man. You sent me this question. I still don't know the answer, but
we're always growing, I guess.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. So I guess I'll start. I guess I thought about this actually quite a lot last night, and I was trying to think like, how would I define myself, or what am I, or who am I, or who is
Dan Peppe? What are you?
Right? Yeah, and I realized that it's I couldn't come up with like I am this, right? And what I thought was, I have a professional life. I'm a professor in the Department of Geosciences. So as a professor, I'm an educator, I'm a researcher, I'm a paleontologist. I study ancient life. That's what I do as my job.
That's your thing.
That's my thing, right? So I'm a paleontologist. I love the outdoors. I love doing things outside. I'm a parent. I've got 2 kids. I mean, I have my son James, my daughter Anna. I'm right. I'm a parent. I'm a spouse. I'm a partner. I enjoy spending time with my family. I enjoy my work, and I think what I realized is I'm kind of many things, I guess, is the best answer to that question. And I have worked really hard in the last 13 years. So I've been at Baylor since 2009, and I worked really hard to find a balance where my life is not being a professor. My life is not just my work. That my life at home, my family life, my life as a friend, my life as a parent, my life as a spouse, like that is also equally important to my job. And so I guess that's why I struggled. I don't know if that even answers the question, but I'm all those things.
I think all these many parts make you whole.
Yes.
It's a lot like your lesson in volume 2 is you wear many hats.
I think that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you. What are your current goals? What's Dan working on?
Yeah, so that's also a good question. I mean, professionally, I I have many goals. I mean, I think what I'm passionate at in my job is trying to understand how plants and animals respond to climate change. It's kind of a funny thing to be interested in, but it's one that I find really fascinating. So I have a bunch of goals associated with that. I mean, I have projects that I'm working on. You know, I work in Eastern Africa, I work in Kenya, I work in Ethiopia, I work in Uganda. I have projects there I'm really interested in, really excited about. I also work on modern plants, and I have a project I'm working on I'm really excited about, like understanding how plants respond to different light environments, something that I think is pretty cool. So I've got these like I have these, you know, sort of professional goals. I'm in kind of a mid-career stage right now, so I'm an associate professor. So, you know, the next step for me is there's a promotion to full professor, so that's a goal. Um, so those are some of my professional goals, right? I mean, I also
Sure.
so my goals are to be like a really good and positive advisor to my students, to help my students succeed in the future, get jobs, move on, be successful. Um, you know, and then in my personal life, I've got, you know, I have goals, you know, associated with, you know, having a happy relationship with my family, my kids being successful. I have, you know, personal goals. You know, I want to do this thing. You know, I want to get better at this activity. I want to succeed in the gym, like that kind of stuff. And so I have a bunch of many goals, I guess.
Awesome. So so no sleep, in running 100 miles an hour, kids, and very, you know, academic specific research and work. What a set of goals. Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
You know, just hearing that will probably inspire people who are viewing. So that's fantastic. Thank you. You hit right into something though. These are the questions from our followers, Dan. So the first one actually is climate change.
Uh-huh.
What should we know and what can we do?
Yeah. I mean, that's a right huge question. I
Yeah.
mean, so we'll tackle the easy one first, I guess, right? So I think, you know, climate change is a really big topic and one that we hear about all the time. And I think when I think about climate change, this is also, I guess, maybe the title of our podcast is wearing many hats. But I think that it is really when we talk about climate change, there's a scientific piece of it. And the science piece is the piece that I understand really well, the piece that I work on. Um, and so there's that piece of it. There's a societal part, right? How climate change is affecting humanity, how is climate change affecting society? There's that piece of it. There's a political piece, right? And that's the piece that often gets the most attention and is an important part, but is the one that's the most polarizing, unfortunately. And then I think that there's also this like really big kind of global community piece of it. And so, right, climate change, if we just take it really to the most basic point, right, climate change is just the change in patterns of weather over years to decades to centuries to millennia. And so all of us experience weather on a daily basis, right? Today in Waco, it's overcast and it was raining this morning, and tomorrow it's supposed to be warm and sunny, right? We experience those changes on a second, sometimes minute, sometimes day basis. But we put those together and we look at what's the temperature every day, and then we come up with what's the average temperature over the month, and then what's the average temperature over the year, and then we can look at that. How does that change from one year to the next? And then we can start building these data sets of longer and longer. And so modern climate change, or global warming, as it's sometimes referred to, is the record of a degree and a half of temperature increase over the last century. And so
Wow.
what that means is that global temperatures on average, so we can take all these averages from all over the world and we can put it together and we can say average temperatures on Earth have increased by a degree and a half over the last 100 years. And and as a result, there's effects associated with that. So when temperatures are warmer, that means that in the poles, the glaciers start to melt, right? We get different patterns of rainfall as a result of that. Sometimes we're starting to see that hurricanes are becoming more intense because ocean temperatures are warmer, and so they're making storms stronger. There's some research that suggests that maybe some of the tornadoes that we're experiencing, like the one that just happened in Mississippi, was stronger as a result of the atmosphere holding more heat and then causing storms to be stronger. We get more rainfall. Like it gets drier in some places and wet in others. And so the effects of climate change, I think it's becoming something that people are starting to recognize. Like how many times have you had a conversation with somebody that says, man, this summer's so hot. It's hotter than it ever was before. And it's because it is. Like it's hotter than it was when we were kids. Like it actually is hotter every summer. Like the craziest thing to think about is that what we're seeing is every year is for the last decade has been warmer than the previous year.
Wow.
And so the other piece of this is, right, we're literally experiencing climate change. And climate change is being caused by greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so the way that greenhouse gases in the atmosphere work are when you have gases like carbon dioxide and methane and water vapor, what they do is energy from the sun comes in and it hits the planet and bounces off. Some of it doesn't make it all the way down to the Earth's surface, but some of those gases, what the gases do is they just bounce that energy back down to the surface of the Earth. And so what that does is that traps the heat. And so when we have more greenhouse gases, more CO2 in particular in the atmosphere, temperatures get warmer. So at the same time that we've seen this increase in temperature, we've seen a dramatic increase in CO2 and carbon dioxide. And so there's this relationship between carbon dioxide and temperature. Carbon dioxide is going up, temperature is going up. And that's what we're experiencing. And that's climate change right now. That's global warming. So that's kind of
so other than not breathing to cause carbon dioxide, right? What can we do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really good question. And the thing about it is it's a really challenging question because individually we can all make choices that reduce what's called our carbon footprint. We can do things to reduce the amount of CO2 that we release. You know, we can choose to carpool, we can choose to walk instead of drive. You know, we can keep our houses a little bit warmer in the summer and a little bit cooler in the winter. We can maybe fly less. We can make individual choices that help reduce our individual carbon footprint. And that's one thing we can do. The other thing, though, that really, and that's the other piece that's like the political piece, is ultimately the things that will affect CO2 and climate are large-scale industry. The biggest carbon emitters are, you know, hydrocarbon producers, concrete manufacturers. Like, I mean, it's and so we need to do things.
Building, and
we're right, exactly. You know, and it's like, and so the only way that those things are going to change is if we make changes at a societal level, a governmental level. We make decisions to prioritize, you know, green energy. We make decisions to reduce carbon emissions. Those are the kinds of things. And so part of what we can do as citizens is talk to our elected officials. And I think that a lot of times we feel like, and I'm using the royal we, but I think that, you know, you read about and you talk to other people, it feels like there's this like federal government on top of us, right? And we have no interaction with them. And they have to make decisions, but our state government has to make decisions, and our city government, and it goes all the way down to that most basic level. Our cities can make decisions that have major impacts, and our states can make decisions, our country can make decisions, and then globally, like all countries together can make decisions. And I think that that's, you know, that's the future. I think that scientists like me can provide information about here's what we know has happened in the past when the climate was warmer or when the climate was colder. We can model what we think is going to happen as a result of climate change. And we can provide that information to the general public and to policymakers. And
Right.
then hopefully we individually can make decisions, and then our policymakers can make decisions that will help us.
Awesome. So
Yeah,
so get informed and ask and talk and get in front of the people that are making those moves, and until
yeah,
then, be conscious of your own choices. Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. That's powerful. Appreciate it. Now that leads into you. You did mention your true love of who you are and what you do. Why geosciences specifically? What led you down this professional path?
Yeah,
And then, like, what's the hardest part? What is the most difficult piece of this body of work of yours?
yeah, yeah. That's a great question. So, um, what I can say is that so growing up, I always loved the outdoors. I was fascinated by the world around me. I was in I was in the Boy Scouts. Some of my like favorite memories as a younger kid are going on canoe trips with my dad and going camping. I was always doing stuff outside, and so I took some biology classes in high school. I found them really interesting. I took this class in it was a really cool class. I can't remember the name of it. I wish I could, but I took this class that involved water sampling of lakes in the area. And so I had to wake up at like 5 in the morning, and we would go out first thing in the morning and we would collect water samples, and we do chemistry of these lakes, and we collect insects. And it was like the coolest thing ever. And it was this environmental science class. And so I was like,
Shout out to Pepe's high school
yeah, I know.
environmental
Yeah,
science teacher. You
exactly.
did it.
Yeah,
You put the
Chris
you bit him
Ustinik. I
with the
remember my
bug, man.
professor. Yeah, exactly. Chris Ustinik. He was awesome. He was my favorite professor really in high school.
Thank you.
Um,
Look what you
and
did.
so I thought I wanted to do environmental science, and that's what I thought I wanted to do. And so I went to St. Lawrence, and I was in, and I talked to my freshman advisor before the semester started, and he said, "Well, take environmental studies," and he said, "You like doing stuff outside, so take geology." And so I took environmental, and it was just like, okay, sure. I had no
All
idea.
right. Right.
Um, and I took environmental studies and I took geology. And environmental studies at St. Lawrence, there was a lot of policy associated with it. And environmental science, like we just talked about climate change, policy is important for not just climate, but water and environment, all that stuff. But I was not really interested in that. Like that was not my thing. And geology, we went out in the field. We like learned about the world around us. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And so I started taking geology classes, and the more I learned about earth science and the history of the earth and what you could do by looking at rocks and
You
looking
got
at
bit by
fossils, the
the
more
bug.
fascinated I became.
Yeah.
And I decided like to become a geology major. And then I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I did not, if you had asked me when we met in 1999, if I was going to be a college professor, I would have said absolutely not. That wasn't even on my radar. Like my mom was an elementary school teacher, and I my whole life thought I'm not going to be an educator. Like I don't want to do that. And then my junior year, I started talking to different people, and I talked to Mark Erickson at St. Lawrence, and he said, "I've got this fossil site in North Dakota that we found of fossil leaves in 1972. Like, would you be interested in studying it?" And I was like, "This seems cool." Um,
So
and so and so I went to North Dakota, and this between my junior and senior year, and I collected fossils, and it was fossil leaves, and it was fascinating. And I was able to like reconstruct this ancient Cretaceous, like 67 million-year-old forest. And it was just like, whoa, this is so cool. I want to keep doing this. And so I went down to the Peabody Museum at Yale to look at some fossils of the same age. And I met this guy, Leo Hickey, who became my PhD advisor. And I got talking to him, and he said, "Hey, I have these ideas about, projects. If you're interested in graduate school, let me know." I went to a geology meeting as a senior in college, and I met other faculty. And then I was like, yeah, I want to do this. I want to go to grad school. I want to learn more
awesome.
about this. And then so I went to Yale, and I became a paleobotanist, and that's kind of how I've ended up where I am. So
I
it
love
was
it.
kind of a funny, long and twisted, and I think a lot of it was like random happenstance. Like if I hadn't taken geology as a freshman, I don't know what I would have done. So
I love it. Awesome. Thank you. Now with that in mind, are there, what would you say is like some of the most difficult aspects of your work?
yeah, I mean, I think that I would say that there's two really big ones, and I think that one of them is from a scientific standpoint, and that's that when the most of the work that I do looks at things that are millions of years old, and so uh, we're looking at the remains of an animal that was alive 20 million years ago. And so, um, unfortunately, it's not like Jurassic Park. You don't go out with your like, your thumper and then, you know, put it on the ground and it shows you like a full skeleton, a fully complete articulated skeleton, right? It doesn't work like that, right? You find isolated pieces of fossils. Sometimes you find a whole skeleton, but those are really uncommon. So we find little bits and pieces of stuff. Um, and so we find pieces of information here and pieces of information there and pieces there and pieces there. And so what we are trying to do is we're basically trying to create a picture of what the world looked like,
A
let's say
big
20
game
million years ago.
of connect the dots.
Yeah, right.
Almost.
And it's
So,
yeah, I mean
your
it's
work in North Dakota brought you all the way to
yeah,
a PhD in Yale who could say, "Oh yeah, here's something of
yeah, right.
similarity." Yeah,
Yeah, and then,
yeah,
and then it's like, okay, so I did my dissertation in North Dakota, and then I started working in New Mexico on similar age stuff, but the plants are completely different, the animals are different. And so, it's like it's trying to put together a puzzle, but you maybe have 20% of the puzzle pieces. And so you're always trying to fill in the gaps with more information. And that's the challenge from a scientific piece. And the other challenge is like it's actually a logistic challenge and one, you know, um, like working in what I call the field. Essentially what I'm doing is most of the time when I go to do research, field research, I'm going out someplace where I'm living in a tent, um, I'm cooking for myself, or I'm have a staff of people that do some of that work for us. We go out, we dig holes in the ground with shovels and pickaxes, and we use brushes. I mean, it's not super glamorous. We spend a lot of time hiking around. And so there's a lot of logistic challenges and
and all that gear too. I
yeah,
imagine. Yeah,
that's right, exactly.
yeah.
So and then you collect, I have a giant backpack and I collect a backpack's full of fossil leaves and I have to hike back to the car. And so
So
there's that piece of it
it's
that
like
that can be a challenge as well. Yeah.
geographic CSI
Yeah,
almost.
yeah,
Yeah,
no, totally. Yeah, that's
yeah.
exactly right. So, I mean, I mean, I love it. That's what I really like doing, but it has its challenges for sure.
Well, you lead right into our next question. What is the hardest thing to instruct? Like, so as a professor, so when you have young Dan Pepe's in front of you, what do you find to be one of the most difficult pieces
Yeah,
to instruct? And then, but what does the teach them about leadership? Bringing you back to next step.
right. Yeah, I mean, so I think that there are many different things, and so I could say um, different things are challenging for different reasons, right? Climate change can be challenging to discuss because it's something that's really polarizing. Evolution is the same thing, right? Where there's this super polarizing view, and people may come in, students often come in with some inherent bias or some
Sure.
they've
Or
heard something about it.
religious versus
Yeah,
scientific, or
right,
yeah,
sure,
yeah,
yeah. And so that can really be a challenge to bridge that gap or to introduce people to these new topics, to find a middle ground where students feel comfortable hearing this new information
sure.
from someone that's different than they've ever heard it from before. I mean, that can be a challenge. Another thing that is also a challenge is is the the combination of the enormity of the geologic record, but then also the duration of it. I mean, the Earth is 4.6 billion years old. I mean, that's a concept that's hard to imagine. When we talk about in geology a lot, we talk about the fourth dimension, sort of a funny thing to think about, but that's time. Like a really old person lives 100 years. Like that's
Eyelash,
infinitesimal.
an
I mean,
eyelash
yeah.
in the
I
time
mean,
scale.
it's like when the classic one is the a clock. And so if you take Earth history and you turn all the history of Earth into a clock, humans are less than the width of a pencil, like that you can draw at the very end of the clock, 11:59 and 59 seconds. Like we're we're less than that second. Like that's how,
Wild.
right? I
That's
mean,
so
that's, and
wild.
it's crazy to think about, right? And so, when and as a geologist, like I think about time all the time. I think about geologic time all the time, but that's a really challenging concept to
That's
introduce to
wild.
someone because
Yeah.
it's so long.
I feel my wheels spinning about concepts of time, and I'm not even in your class. So yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just like it's so much longer than what you can think of. And so, and that's it's both a challenge, but it's also really liberating because it allows you to. So when we talk about evolution, for example, um, evolution can be a really challenging concept, but when you start adding time into it, when you boil down the basics of evolution to changes in allele frequencies, like, and so
Yeah.
there's a
Wow.
change from one generation to the next, right, in our genes, and then you just add time, right? Like that's what you can do to that. And so you can imagine that if you just keep changing from one generation to the next, if you have enough time, that can lead to a new species arising or a real major change in the evolution of a species through time. And so it's a challenge, but also it allows you to, sometimes it helps you explain some of these hard concepts. And yeah, I mean, I think that, the other thing, like I tell my students, a lot of times I tell students like freshmen that take the class, and this is like trying to think about it from a leadership perspective. But I think that one of the things that being an earth scientist helps you, gives you, is perspective. And it's a totally different perspective, right? Like when we think about what's happening today, it's what's happening today is this tiny snapshot in this huge, huge history of the earth.
Yeah.
And if we can understand what's happened in the past, we can understand what's happening today and what might happen in the future. And that can give us an insight that we can't get from anything else, which is part of why I think geology is cool. But it also is something that allows someone who is, let's say, a computer scientist who's taking my class, Evolution and Extinction, when he's writing a code or something, he can be thinking about like, okay, so what does this mean? Like, how does this have any context to the broader history,
When
or
will this code, stop?
yeah, or like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if I'm thinking about to create something permanent, like maybe like, can I create something permanent? Not really, right? And so it helps you think about those things in a different way. So
I can dig it. Thank you. Um, what's your hands down favorite discovery, if any? And one of the things that I learned going through my ADD is that no finding actually is a finding. Is that true for you? Is no finding still a finding in your work? And what's your favorite discovery then?
yeah, I mean, so yes, the answer to no finding is a
Yes
finding.
and
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So, I mean, okay, so I'll give you the answer to that, and then sort of my favorite discovery.
Sure, sure.
So what I would say is that so many times finding the absence of something is really cool. So just as an example, in some of my work in New Mexico, the project that I have worked on for over a decade is looking at what happened to plants and animals after the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction. That's when the dinosaurs went extinct. So the dinosaurs go extinct, and so that process, this big meteor hits the Earth. That meteor causes huge amount of dust to come up to the atmosphere. The dust blocks out the sun. The plants die. The animals eat the plants die. The animals eat the animals eat the plants die. That's this cascading extinction. But life survives, obviously, because we're here, right? And so there's a response to it. And so what we see is we see all these like mammals and these plants, and they're changing really, really rapidly. And so we went into this project with this. Our hypothesis was the changes in plant and animal communities that we see are caused by climate change. And so climate is changing and causing turnover in the animals and in the plants. And what we have found now, after working there for more than 10 years, is climate doesn't change. So like wow. It's exactly the opposite of our prediction. Like the climate is pretty similar for the whole 5 million year record that we have, but the plants and animals are still changing. And so what that means is that we have to rethink our hypothesis. We have to rethink what's causing those changes, right? So that's a finding, right? And it's
not because it's not what your hypothesis was.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And you know, and that's what's really cool. I mean, I think that so often we have these ideas, and then what ends up being the result is like the opposite of what we expected. So yeah, and I think so. I would say that my favorite finding is that's hard to answer, but what I'll say is that I have like a project right now that I'm working on that has been one of the like most intellectually fulfilling projects I've worked on. And I think what I'd say is
scoop. Is this kind of an
it's a little bit, yes. So it is, right? And so we just had two papers accepted. They're going to be coming out like pretty soon, and they were accepted in one of the like premier journals in my field. And it's this really cool result. And what we find is we find evidence of environments much earlier than people had suggested before. We find evidence of and so the thing about this project, the reason that it's been so cool and the reason that it's one of my favorite discoveries is because it was this really big collaborative project, and where I worked with a bunch of other colleagues who had similar interests and similar goals to me, but we came at it from many different directions. And
talk about leadership. Wow.
And so what was so cool about it was that, you know, my piece is I have this piece of the fossil plants and also looking at the geology. And then I have a colleague that looks at different parts of the fossil plants, that looks at microfossils, so little tiny fossils. I have another colleague that looks at apes, another colleague that looks at the animal fossils, someone else who looks at the soils, someone else who looks at the organic carbon that's preserved in the soils, and then many, many other people. I mean, I think we have 23 co-authors or something like that. And so every person brought in a little different piece of information. And then what we were able to do is take all that different information and put it together into this comprehensive story that none of us could have done independently. And
that's pretty badass.
It's so cool, right? I mean, like it's awesome. I mean, and it's been literally a decade. We got funded on this project 10 years ago, and the papers are going to come out like in a month. But it involved that kind of work. It involves students and postdocs and faculty.
Talk about it takes a village. Wow.
Yeah, right. But we wouldn't, if we had each done our own thing, if we had stayed in our little silo, we would have had our cool information that was really interesting, but we couldn't have put it together. We couldn't have synthesized it. And that's what's been really awesome. What
an awesome discovery. Thank you for sharing. Congratulations, by the
way.
Yeah,
thanks.
Two major acceptances that way. To wrap up the viewer portion of questions, tell us about a student that has, or do you have a student story that you're willing to share that was successful and somewhat weaves in, intertwined with their leadership or something that may have happened? Do you have anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, there? Yeah, I do actually. And so I have a great example of a student who has exceeded like through adversity. And so I had a student who came to Baylor after a little bit of time off. She came as a graduate student um, after she had taken some time off from after college. She graduated from college. She started at Baylor, and she started at Baylor, and she was doing really well. But she suffered from substance abuse and suffered from an eating disorder. And the stress of graduate school like were triggers for her, and she relapsed. And she came to me and was like, I can't do this. She ended up like she went to an inpatient treatment center, and I met with her like during the process and during her recovery, and I like left the door open, and I said, I have faith in you. Like she had showed me that she had the ability to be successful.
Keep pushing. Yeah, yeah.
And and she kept me up to date. She kept me up to date with her progress and let me know what was happening. And so a year after she started, she came back, and she had worked on herself. Like she had worked on herself. She'd gone to therapy. She'd done all of the work, and she was great. She was awesome. She was one of the best students I've had. Like her project was fantastic. She ended up Baylor has an addiction and recovery center on campus, and she became a leader in that community. Like she gave interviews about it. She talked about her experience, which I can only imagine must have been really challenging, but she talked about it. I mean, it's vulnerable, but by doing that, like, she was leading by example, right? And
She
then
embraced it. She empowered
exactly
herself. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And then she spent the next 2 years, she finished her master's degree. She did a fantastic master's project. She gave presentations at conferences. She worked with undergrads. She was a teaching assistant. And then she is a graduate. She's a PhD student. She's in her third year in a PhD program at a premier institution in the US. She's an awesome case study of
Sure.
like success story. And we're really close. Her master's thesis is about to be published. Like she's done all the stuff. I mean, it's great. I mean, you couldn't ask for anything better. And despite that adversity, like she persevered, and she, led by example. She did what she needed to do to be successful and continues to be successful. It's awesome. It's a great story that I really love.
You heard it here first. Dr. Pepe is telling you that if you have personal adversities, you can take them, rebrand them, and empower yourself with them and do what you wish to do with your success. Thank you. That's if that doesn't get anybody fired up, I don't know what will. Thank you. Tell us about a day in the life. How does leadership play a role in your day to day, other than running around like a crazy person with the van and getting the kids to? So right, there's layers and hats, but what's a day in the life at Baylor like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think so generally, I mean, my day, I'd like drop my son off at school or get him ready, get my kids ready. I usually go to the gym in the morning, and I come in to the office. On a day that I'm not teaching, I'll often have a meeting or two with my students, with my graduate students. And so we'll talk about their progress. We'll make goals for the future. I spend time doing some of my own work. I spend a lot of time on meetings like this, on Zoom or on Teams, meeting with colleagues or collaborators. And then on days when I teach, I'll come in similar. I usually don't have meetings with students on those days. Instead, I have classes where I teach.
Like office hours for those.
Yeah, I have some office hours. Give a lecture to students, talk to them about whatever their questions are. And then, of course, I fill in the balance of it with other department meetings and committees and all that kind of stuff. But that's sometimes I get to work in the lab. Sometimes I get to write a paper of my own. Sometimes I get to do my own research. So I guess it's not super exciting.
You know
I
what
would say.
though? What I hope Baylor's watching. What I will say is how excited he is on his research and bringing that back. We could feel it, but the day to day sounds like it is about finding the opportunity for your students and working with collaboration on your fellow colleagues. I totally feel you there. Thank you. I get that. All right, next step questions for you. What are you reading right now? What's on the nightstand or in the Kindle? Because
Yeah,
these become my homework because I get intrigued to, get motivated to look at what my people are interested in. What are you reading right now?
yeah. So I'm reading a book right now. It's called The Gratitude Project, um, and it's all about gratitude, um, and talking about finding gratitude in your life. And it's written by it's written by researchers, and so it has a little bit of a scientific bent, but it has the kind of some of the science behind gratitude and the benefits of gratitude in your life.
Just a
Sort of,
positive mindset
yeah,
and
exactly. And thinking about, because that, for me, like, I can often get in this like negative spiral or negative space and not think about, not take the moment to think about what are the things that you have to be grateful for, or
well,
the
in Texas, I
experiences that you have.
imagine, I'm thankful for air conditioning today
Right.
or
Yeah, totally.
the
But I
lights
mean,
are
I think,
on.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that that's like, so often we take stuff for granted, but even sometimes things that seem terrible, or sometimes you think like, why does this thing happen to me all the time? Um, and and in some cases, it's not that it's happening to you all the time. Maybe it's that the situation you've put yourself in, or maybe it's that like you're doing something and you have to think about reframing that, and being more positive and having gratitude, and giving gratitude. It comes back, I think, is the other thing. So I've been reading a couple of books on gratitude lately, and sort of that experience, and it's been really positive. Not ironically, right? It couldn't make sense.
The
But
Gratitude Project, check it
yeah,
out. um, what would you say is the biggest misconception that people have about you? And how do you work through that?
yeah, I've thought about this one too, actually.
Oh
And
man, we had your wheels turning,
yeah,
huh?
you did. Yeah, yeah. It was yeah, to so for Chris Sargent, my 3S friend, right? I was actually thinking about this because I was looking at my sleep last night and thinking about my dreams and putting together this whole thing, right? Um, but I think so. One of the things that often happens, is just like you, Angelo. I have many tattoos. I have many visible tattoos, um, and I think that as a result, people often have a preconceived notion about who you are or what you do or what you're like, because you're you're covered in tattoos,
Yeah.
um and I think that that's interesting, because it's like the first impression, and it's always like, people are always like, it's hard to get past a first impression.
Yeah.
And I think that that's not actually true, right? I mean, I think that what ends up happening is when you start to talk to people and you start to connect to them, and then they start realizing, oh, right, okay, yeah. And I think sometimes it's fun for me because I will know someone for quite a long time, and then it will come up like, what do you do? And then I'll be like, I'm a professor at Baylor.
All
And
the
they're like,
time. All the
oh, I
time.
had no idea. Like, this just happened like last week. I was at the gym, and I was talking to someone that I have worked out next to for the last 6 months. And they were like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm a professor at Baylor." And they were like, "Oh, are they okay with you having tattoos?" Like, that was actually a question,
Right,
right?
so you've seen them for probably years, and
Yeah.
then the first thing is, whoa, 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 yeah, and
So I
you don't
think,
know you don't know what the preconceived notions
yes,
were,
yeah,
that's the beauty of it, is we're not even making any mention of what we think they are,
yes,
but they have
yeah,
these notions about our ink,
yeah,
and you just and you're like, oh my gosh,
yeah. And so I think, like, so that's definitely
they
one of them
let
for
you in
sure.
there, huh?
Yeah, right, exactly, right. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, no, I mean, that's just who I am, right? I think the other one that's kind of a little bit funnier, but I think that's like, people will also, when they find out what I do, they'll ask me if I'm like Indiana Jones or Ross from Friends. Like, or like Jurassic Park.
Yes.
Um, and I
Yes,
think,
I am.
the thing that's so fun about it is that there's these little tiny kernels of reality in those movies or television shows that we know really well.
That they
And so,
glamorize
yeah,
masterfully. Yeah.
and so it's like, like my life is not like I'm not like Indiana Jones, but I do go to exotic places to collect fossils. Um, the life is not like Jurassic Park, but maybe a little small amount like collecting fossils, so I think that's
Sure,
always
sure.
another kind of fun, the public perception of what a paleontologist or an archaeologist is like so warped by our.
You know what though, Dan? If they only witnessed the 10 minutes of you describing your body of work and what you enjoy, it's glamorous to you. And no matter what the context is, if it's really hot where you are, if it's uncomfortable, the bugs are bad, it's I really am lugging 20 extra pounds of whatever it may be. Watching you light up about there's no misconception, and you are excited
Well,
about
yeah,
your
I
work.
appreciate that.
You know what I mean? So there's no
Yeah,
misconception in that. That's for sure. But
yeah,
you're
for
not
sure.
Indiana Jones.
Right, yeah, I'm not Indiana Jones.
You're not getting the big ruby. That's yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. And the Nazis are not chasing me.
Dan, tell us about a time that you. I have to change this question because I write failed, and that has such connotation to it. Going back to perception, right? But tell us about a time that maybe you were challenged as a leader, or you botched it as a leader.
Mm, yeah, I mean, well, I feel like that happens all the time, but I think,
Guilty.
yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is like this kind of goes back to what you mentioned, what I wrote about in my piece for your book. I'm not plugging it intentionally, but just um, one
Follow
of
this
the.
one. If you're not interested in volume 2 with Dan in it, there's mine specifically.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Um, I think one of the things that I have realized, and as I have advanced in my career as an academic, is that I came into my faculty position knowing how to be a researcher. And what has happened through my career, and it happened pretty quickly, but it's happened as I have gotten more further and further along, is that you become more of a manager, you become more of an administrator, and and I no one trains you for those roles, and you have to figure them out. And I think that there have been times when I have been in charge of a field season, and I haven't um, I haven't done the best job of providing the students I'm working with all the information that they needed, or I had an assumption about their experiences. This is, I assumed that they had been camping before, that they had cooked on a camp stove, right? That they knew
Right.
that we were going to
Right.
be walking 10 miles a day. Like I made these assumptions, and then when we get to camp, and then it turns out that, oh, so this guy doesn't have a sleeping bag, or this guy
I
doesn't
have no
have.
idea to put a tent up.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah,
Steaks. What do you mean?
yeah, and
We got
so.
ribeyes? Yeah.
Right, exactly. I mean, I could tell you, like, there I have one field season as an example. We sent a couple of students out early and asked them to do the shopping, and without realizing that they hadn't ever done camp cooking before.
Oh no.
And it was like we get there, and they hadn't brought any cooking oil, they hadn't got any fat, right? Like, they brought hamburger to make at 6,000 feet in elevation. Like, it was these like kind of
Okay.
kind of
Yeah.
funny things that you don't think about. I mean, I think about it now, but I didn't think about it
You
before
sure
then.
didn't think about it when you first started.
Right,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And so I think that those are both times when I have been not less than successful, right? I think would be the best way to put it. Um, but I think that I have learned from those experiences. I try to use those experiences to then be better the next time. So I know now, I have a whole protocol. I talk to students the first time they are going to go out in the field. I talk to them about all the stuff they need. We go over all the equipment together. Like we do some of those things
Here's the
so that,
climate.
yeah, right.
Here's
So
the
that
insects. Here's,
exactly, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So that
yeah.
we can be more successful. And I think that, those are times when in the moment you feel terrible, like, oh man, I've totally failed. Um, or I have done a terrible job. And then you can use them sometimes
Embrace
as
it.
as learning
Embrace it.
experiences. We'll figure this out, we'll parboil the hamburger so that it cooks all the way. Like, we can make this work. Um, we'll solve the problem and then we'll move forward. And I think, I guess those are kinds of some of the examples I can think of.
That's magnificent. Thank you. Those are great. Wow. And you don't hindsight, right? Like you're like, oh yeah.
Yeah,
Or
totally.
you never, yeah, you just
Yeah, why
never
didn't I
catch
think
it.
of this beforehand, right? I mean,
Where
yeah.
did that come from? Yeah, yeah. All right. We have made it, Dan. Last question. Are you ready for it?
I think so.
What thoughts or ideas do you want to leave people who turn into the lessons in leadership leader cast? What are some things that you would like? What's the last message that you'd like to leave viewers and people who read through your answers to your questions?
Yeah. Boy, that's another daunting question, right? That's like a who is kind of question, right? What do you want to be remembered by? Um,
What's on your tombstone, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that, I guess what I think if we kind of think about everything we've talked about, I mean, I do think that, um, I think that, I guess one thing is we can learn from our experiences. We can learn from our failures. We can take my student as an example where you can take something and I guess we can take my student's example. We can think about it from a gratitude perspective, right? We can take something that was terrible and traumatic, but we can also think about what there are positives that you can take away from it. Like she grew as a person, like I grew as an advisor and as a person from working with her. We got better as humans, and then we came out the other side and were able to be successful. And and I know that that's not always the case, and that's totally fine and that's totally fair. But I think that, we can build on, learn from our mistakes. We can take those into the future, and help us improve, our ourselves and society that we live in. And that kind of, maybe we can go back to climate change, right?
Yeah.
That individually we can make a difference and collectively we can make a really big difference. And I think that that's
Also, with
you
your
know,
two publications coming out
right.
collectively, you
Yeah,
can make a
yeah, that's
big
exactly
difference.
right. That,
Yeah.
and then I think that's a big thing, right? By working together, um, working with a community of people, you can solve problems that otherwise feel unsolvable. Um, and I think the other thing is, it's okay to do many different things. Like
Yeah.
that's been something that I overextend myself a lot. So I'm maybe not the best example, but I think that, you don't have to define yourself as a single person. I mean, when I think about you, Angelo, I mean, I couldn't define you as how would I define you, right? I mean, I think that
Sure.
it's like, you're a dean, you're a father, you're a grandfather, you have next step leadership, you're an amazing friend, like you have all of these characteristics, right? I mean, but I think that we all have that. And I think from my perspective, we should embrace that, and feel good about it, right? That's who we are, and that's good, right? We should see who
Yeah.
we are and feel good about it.
I think the other piece that I keep coming back to is don't give up, even with not preparing your students, seeking ways to do it.
Yeah.
Being a light at the end of the tunnel or a flashlight in the dark for your student, and keeping an opportunity of being her number one, cheerleader in her process
Mhm.
to get where she need to be. Don't give up on just because it looks one way doesn't mean it has to be that way. That's definitely something I'm learning from our time together as well. Very, very awesome. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you so much.
yeah. And one other thing I gotta share this because I got a request for it. It's my favorite rock. You can't really see it, unfortunately, but it's really cool. It has all these ripples on it. It was deposited in a stream 66 million years ago. So it's pretty
66 billion years
million,
ago.
million, 66
Million. Oh,
million,
66
66
million. Oh,
million.
that's
So
right.
it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool fossil. It's a pretty cool rock. It's not a fossil, it's just a rock.
3S
But
training
pretty
is
cool.
very happy to see it. I guarantee it. Oh man. I guess lastly, thank you to your wife and family and Baylor for letting us borrow you today
Yeah,
to
yeah,
to talk
absolutely.
about all the success and everything that you have going on. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today.